Now, UNRISD produces its flagship report every 5 years or so. It serves to crystallize the main insights from our research in that period. Now, there are some particular characteristics that make UNRISD UNRISD. Research networks from all over the world, deeply rooted in the Global South. A research process that is shaped and driven by our counterparts and that seeks to strengthen capacities over time. A natural inclination to unpack the rhetoric and buzzwords and challenge accepted wisdom. Now, in addition to those, UNRISD has always adopted a multidisciplinary approach to its research. With the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, we have a narrative and a set of goals that is very well suited to how UNRISD undertakes its work. An agenda that is integrated across sectors, reflects better the complexity of development, and doesn't shy away from politics. So the report that we launched today, Policy Innovations for Transformative Change, offers insights on how governments and other national stakeholders can make progress in the 2030 Agenda in a way that lives up to the promise of being transformational. Now, secondly, I wanted to say a few thank yous. Some of you will know that we've had a particularly challenging year in UNRISD. We've had to fight for our survival. We've had to change the way that we do a few things. And we've had to make some very difficult decisions. So my first thank you is to our network of supporters who've rallied around us, who have advocated on our behalf, who have interceded with governments to offer some additional support in this tricky time, and who have really stood by us. Secondly, to our donor partners who have recommitted to UNRISD and increased their support, notably Switzerland, Sweden, and Finland. And then lastly, to all the staff of the Institute who have responded to the challenges we've faced, who have worked very hard to show how relevant our research work is to the contemporary development debate. And key in that, of course, has been the production of this flagship report. Now, in a brief moment, I'm going to turn to Michael Møller, the Director General of the UN Office at Geneva, to offer some introductory remarks. Some housekeeping information before that. The report is available at www.unrisd.org/flagship 2016. So you can find all of the chapters there and the fuller case studies. Secondly, the event is being recorded and will shortly be available on our UNRISD website. Thirdly, we're also live tweeting from the event, and it's a way to offer questions if you don't want to put your hand up to. Simply put @UNRISD in the tweet, and we'll do our best to incorporate those questions into the session at the end. And then lastly, you should have near to you a feedback form, because we're always trying to improve the way that we do things, improve our events, and improve how we translate our policy into communications and then practice. So if you would just take a few minutes to fill that in, we'd be very grateful as well. Michael, over to you.
6 years ago, when governments met in New York to review progress on the Millennium Development Goals, the United Nations Research Institute for Social Development published a report that argued that global efforts to tackle poverty were being undermined by rapidly growing inequalities, both within and between countries. That report strengthened the discussion on inequalities, and we now, of course, have the issue of inequality front and center of Agenda 2030 and the SDGs, whether that is a growing inequality between elites and people living in poverty, or the inequalities we see between different groups because of gender, ethnicity, disability or sexuality, or the inequalities between countries. Research done by UNRISD on important and sometimes controversial issues, such as care, the environment, or new forms of economic collaboration, have fueled not only debates and enhanced understanding, but also changes in policy and positions by governments. Small but influential, with deep roots also in the research networks of the Global South, UNRISD is a strong and progressive voice within social policy. The Institute is also an important member of our international Geneva family and adds tremendous value to our activities promoting peace rights and well-being for all. Today, coinciding with the International Day for the Eradication of Poverty, UNRISD is launching its new report, Policy Innovations for Transformative Change. The report provides important insights into the question, how can we make the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development live up to its transformational potential? The report highlights policy innovations that many governments and others, often in the Global South, are already taking into account when addressing the challenge of sustainability. It argues that transformation requires attacking the root causes of problems rather than just the symptoms, working truly across silos in an integrated way, and forging inclusive political processes and new partnerships. And I fully expect this report to be as influential as its predecessors. Ladies and gentlemen, we live in a world facing many overlapping challenges, and yet also a world still recovering from the financial crisis. At times like these, it's easy to squeeze the money going into research, to think that we already have the answers. And yet, the complexity of the 2030 Agenda certainly shows us that we do not have many of the answers yet, or whether indeed a policy that works in one country will work well in another. Research is an important cornerstone of an effective response to our contemporary challenges, and UNRISD has shown consistently over time that its research is insightful, relevant, and of high quality. Paul mentioned the financial difficulties that has been facing UNRISD over the past year. We are on our way out of the woods, but we need your support and your active intervention. If you're a government representative, or you're an NGO and civil society representative, on your governments to continue supporting UNRISD and to enlarge the support base, because if we don't, and if all of us don't put our shoulder to the wheel, we still stand the risk of not having an incredibly useful tool to make sure that the social element is maintained and enriched in our discussion on how to move forward on the SDGs and a number of other issues that we're dealing with. So please don't take the fact that we've managed to come quite a long way. We still need a very strong support from all of you to make sure that UNRISD not only survives, but thrives and adapts itself to the new requirements and to the new challenges. So I thank you in advance for your help. In closing, I commend this report to you, and I hope it will lead you to explore how UNRISD can support you in your own roles, whether in government, civil society, or the academic community. I thank you very much, and I wish you and us all an excellent event. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, I would first like to thank UNRISD and Paul for inviting Switzerland to speak on the important topic of transformative change needed for the implementation of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. Switzerland has been a supporter of UNRISD's work for more than 5 decades and has recently decided to renew and increase its commitment to UNRISD for one simple reason. We believe that UNRISD is occupying an important and a unique space. Important because UNRISD is the only UN research institute focusing primarily on social development. UNRISD has contributed tremendously to policy debates with research on topics ranging from green economy to urbanization, from social protection to gender issues, always with a view on bringing the social development angle to the most pressing development policy questions of the day. UNRISD is unique because it thinks inside the UN system, but outside of mainstream UN policy debates, with positive results for the entire development system. Moreover, UNRISD is one of the few research institutes that truly represents the views and opinions of researchers from the South, something that is very rare for many organizations that are shaping thinking around development. This important and unique role will be of great use for pursuing the central priority of the next years, the implementation of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. We are indeed convinced that UNRISD's evidence-based research will identify new and innovative pathways and concrete instruments towards more inclusive development outcomes and towards the implementation of the SDGs. UNRISD's flagship report on policy innovations for transformative change does exactly that. The answers it provides to its underlying question of how can we transform our world in order to achieve the 2030 agenda are both concrete and innovative. On one hand, the report goes beyond the usual buzzwords and illustrates with concrete examples how innovative policies in fields such as care and social and solidarity economy contribute concretely to transformative change. Please don't get me wrong, I do not claim that we should not use buzzwords such as multi-sectorial or multi-stakeholder approach, multi-level partnerships, inclusiveness and innovation anymore. These words can be useful, but only if they have meat on their bone. The present UNRISD report with its concrete examples has that depth. Let me mention just one example between many. Green conditional cash transfers in Brazil, where government subsidies are aiming at incentivizing good behavior on both social and environmental issues. On the other hand, the report discusses policy innovations to implement the SDGs as a race to the top, where countries can learn from one another and how to address sectoral policies in a wholesome manner. In Switzerland, we have been doing that for a long time between our cantons. As you know, Switzerland is composed of 26 cantons. As a highly decentralized country, Switzerland gives a lot of policy space to single cantons, which can work as policy labs with good ideas spreading fast from one place to the next. Taxes on trash bags, for example, that lead to significant reduction in waste by changing both consumer behavior but also the way producers use packaging. A drug policy where Switzerland has been among the first countries in the world to reintegrate heroin addicts in society rather than criminalizing them are only two such examples. These, at the time, innovative policies started at the local level to become standards for the whole country. Geneva, as the operational hub for the Agenda 2030, serves as a policy lab where people come together to discuss, share, and spread innovative policies and new pathways in order to find solutions and inspirations towards the implementation of the Agenda 2030. This event is one more illustration of this reality. In Geneva, we benefit from the numerous and diverse actors who provide unique operational expertise in fields such as labor, health, human rights, humanitarian affairs, and peace and security. UNRISD is one of these actors, and I wish that your excellent work and great examples will not only be discussed today in the Palais des Nations, but tomorrow at ILO and on Wednesday at World Vision International. I would like to reiterate once again Switzerland's support for your work and our appreciation for your excellent report. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon, everybody, dear colleagues, distinguished guests. It's my pleasure to give a short overview of this flagship report 2016. And as Paul has already extended thank yous to the entire team and our donors and our global networks that have supported us through quite challenging times, I can just get directly into the substance of this report and try to give you some flavor of the case studies and the key messages that this report aims to transmit. The report comes at a time where the governments are designing and starting to implement their new strategies for the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. This commitment, the 2030 commitment, consists of a comprehensive and far-reaching set of universal and transformative goals and targets, and it is meant to be a new global compact. So what we try to do is to unpack the concept of transformative change and to present you with a range of policy innovations and conditions for their implementation, assessing their transformative potential. And this is meant to be our contribution to the implementation of this new agenda. I would like to start with the key three messages we would like to put forward with this report. First of all, and the first message in a way defines what we understand by transformative change, is that combating poverty, inequality, and environmental destruction requires transformative change that directly attacks the root causes of these problems instead of the symptoms. Secondly, transformative change can be driven by innovative policies. And innovative policies need to overcome palliative and silo approaches and promote an eco-social turn in development thinking and practice. And thirdly, innovations are transformative when they are grounded in universal and rights-based policy approaches, promote policy integration and policy coherence without subordinating eco-social objectives to growth and profit maximization, when they change markets so they work for society and the environment, and when they lead to empowerment and accountable and effective institutions. So these messages illustrate that the transformative vision of the 2030 Agenda is actually very ambitious. And we actually need to be ambitious to overcome successfully the many complex global challenges we are confronted with: poverty and hunger, climate change, unsustainable growth, economic crisis, migration, health epidemics, inequality, social exclusion, lack of decent work and social protection, political instability, violent conflicts, and many more. The SDGs recognize that these problems are interrelated and require integrated solutions, a perspective that was already promoted at the Social Summit in 1995. The Copenhagen Summit for us is an important milestone as it triggered a social turn in development policy and thinking, which was then amplified by the MDGs with their strong focus on social development and other very important global social policy initiatives like the Social Protection Floor initiatives and others. While this social turn was very important, in practice it often did not go deep enough, though. And we extract two important lessons from the social turn over the last 2 decades. First of all, palliative interventions, residual or targeted interventions, are not enough. And secondly, focusing on social policy while neglecting economics, politics, and the environment does not lead to sustainable and transformative solutions. A message and a finding that we already put forward in our previous flagship report on poverty and inequality. Now, the 2030 Agenda does therefore present a very important opportunity at this point in time. First, to reinvigorate, to deepen, and to broaden this social turn into an eco-social turn. And secondly, to promote a more coherent, integrated, and universal approach that leaves no one behind. Now, the report analyzes transformative potential of reforms and innovations in 6 key areas with relevance across multiple SDGs, as you can see on this slide. And in these 6 areas, UNRISD has also a comparative advantage and rich evidence base to draw upon. It's social policy, care policies, social and solidarity economy, climate change and eco-social policy, domestic resource mobilization, governance, and politics. And to assess actually whether a policy or innovation in these different areas is transformative, we need to take a close look at the design, the reform process, and the reform outcomes of these policies. Is the reform process inclusive and democratic? Is the policy design based on human rights part of a comprehensive and integrated strategy? And does it reflect an eco-social rationale? Ultimately, we expect transformative outcomes in the form of long-term progressive changes in economic, social, and political structures. And in particular, economic and political empowerment of disadvantaged and vulnerable groups, more equal redistribution of income and wealth, active citizenship, greater agency of civil society organizations and social movements, changes in North-South power relations and global governance institutions, and very importantly, a reversal of hierarchies of norms and values that up until now subordinated social and environmental goals to economic objectives. So the report draws as much as possible on country experience of innovations that bode well for transformative change. You will find examples from more than 30 countries analyzed in greater depth and shorter reference and data on many more. In the following, I want to pick 3 interesting examples of policy innovation. However, I would like to let you know that looking at an individual policy in isolation, which is very similar to a silo approach, is not the perspective taken in the report. Rather, the report aims to look at transformative change from a holistic perspective that takes into account the 3 pillars of the SDG agenda and looks also at the processes of decision-making and implementation. Now, from the many important policy innovations we find in Latin America, I would like to present to you the Uruguayan National Care System, which was created in November last year. It grants to all persons with care needs, children, older persons, disabled and sick persons, the right to receive care. And it considers women as the main care providers equally as rights holders. It promotes the autonomy of care receivers and the co-responsibility of the state, the community, the market and the family, as well as between women and men in the provision of care. Very interestingly, social and solidarity economy care providers and civil society organizations are also part of the system. And one stated objective of this system is to change the sexual division of labor within households, as most unpaid care work is still provided by women and girls. It is also an example of inclusive political reform process with key participation of women's movements to make sure that the system was also boosting gender equality. Another very important part of the reform was its link with a major tax reform in Uruguay that actually provided the funding and made it possible to implement it last year. And this tax reform contributed to the transformative outcome of this reform by also creating a fairer tax system, a more efficient tax system, and reducing the Gini coefficient of the country and boosting tax revenues by annually 7%. My second example is the Mahatma Gandhi National Rural Employment Guarantee Act, which is, as I read recently, the most studied government program in the world at the moment. So I don't have to tell you that this is a public works program that has catered over the last years for almost 1/3 of all rural households in India, providing at least 100 days of paid employment each year. What is maybe less known is that most of the work undertaken under this program is devoted to environmental conservation, natural resource management, water security, soil conservation, higher land productivity, so contributing to the SDGs and to environmental protection in multiple ways. In that sense, it's an ideal combination, as the ambassador also mentioned in the case of the Bolsa Verde in Brazil, an ideal example of eco-social policy. My third example comes from Africa and is on the innovative partnerships that have been created in Rwanda for extending health services. And interestingly, the government in Rwanda has reformed the existing community-based health insurance funds through designing a legal framework, implementing national standards, legislating mandatory enrollment, and increasing actually coverage from 7 to 91% in 12 years. And all this was possible through increased domestic and donor funding to scale the system. So as you can see, and you will find many more examples in the report, much has been achieved. But driving sustainable development is seldom a win-win game, as much as we would like to see that. Every reform entails benefits and costs for different groups. And transformative change also encounters various obstacles. In our case study analysis, we have found obstacles to transformative change when change remains rhetorical or cosmetic, when reforms are implemented in a siloed way, when policies are incoherent or trade-offs occur, and when policy innovations are captured by special interests or bolted onto business as usual. There are also obstacles when new partnerships reproduce or reinforce asymmetric power instead of changing and equalizing it. and when policy innovation is not accompanied by changing social norms and values. And a big problem, and something that looms large in the future still, is innovations that are conducive to transformative change may not be sustained in the longer term. And just to go back quickly to our three examples on Uruguay, Rwanda, and India. For example, in India, although the policy has a huge coverage, in that sense, it's a huge silo, one could say, other social policies are still not reaching sufficient coverage, especially social insurance for the informal sector. In the case of Rwanda, a lot of the transformative potential of extension of social policies is undermined by the still very authoritarian character of the political regime that does not foster sufficient inclusion and political freedoms. In the case of Uruguay, the new care system actually depends on the continuous mobilization of women's groups and also on the desired changes in social norms, because the system is very ambitious and actually wants to promote gender equality, better care policies, but also a different division of labor in terms of unpaid work. And lastly, in the case of India, we also see that there's still a question of the sustainability of the assets created, for example, and the quality of the assets created under the public works scheme. Now, this all tells us that the precondition for transformative change, as well as an outcome of it, is to increase policy coherence through a political process of negotiation, bargaining and contestation between multiple actors at multiple levels, from local to national, from regional to global. And the aim is really to reach policy integration at the national level that reflects the eco-social turn, in a sense that the integration between the three pillars, economic, social, and environmental, does not undermine or put to a second place the softer goals of ecological and social objectives. And secondly, that we also have vertical coherence between global governance schemes in trade, finance, migration, human rights, with national policy making. Now I come to the end of my presentation and would like to present to you quickly some of the key cross-cutting issues and guidance for policymakers that come out of the case studies we have analyzed in this report. Implementing the SDGs is, of course, a task that goes beyond policymakers and includes a wide collaboration between politicians, decision makers, international organizations, civil society groups, and also the private sector. We urge decision makers and all actors in this process to re-embed markets in social and ecological norms, to reverse the existing normative hierarchy to position social and environmental priorities above economic ones, to promote and enable meaningful political participation and empowerment, to design policies and institutional frameworks according to principles of universalism, human rights, and social justice, to promote an eco-social turn and use an eco-social lens in all decisions and actions, and to invest in research on innovative ways to design, implement, and evaluate transformative policies for sustainable development. Now, as I said in the beginning, the 2030 Agenda constitutes a new global compact. And just as the 20th century social contract took decades to unfold, we cannot predict what form the New Deal and the new politics will take. What this report tried to do is to identify a range of relevant innovations in ideas, policies, institutions, and forms of social organizations and mobilization. These are likely to constitute not only important elements in the new compact, but also key drivers of transformative change. So as Paul said, the report is available online and can be downloaded. And thank you very much for your attention.
It is really an honor to be here to launch this flagship of UNRISD, which is an excellent work, and I really enjoyed reading it over the weekend. The title is very ambitious, Transformative Change, Transforming Our World, which is actually the title of the 2030 Agenda. And a result of the huge consultation that was done before 2015, The World We Want, which was led by Paul Lutt at the time in UNDP. The report, it is very good for a number of issues. First is, as Katja was explaining, to transform the world, to change the world, we need to tackle the root problem, the root causes of problem, the structural causes, and provide structural solutions to them. Looking at solutions that are progressive, that is linked to social justice, that are systemic and not just little patch-ups. In this sense, it's so important to keep focusing not palliative interventions targeted to the most vulnerable, but really structural solutions, systemic. And they need to address the long term. So for all that is reflected across the report in a number of areas. What is very attractive is the presentation of innovation. Policy innovations in different manners. And I'm going to highlight a few because I could see that the audience actually was very attentive when Katja was explaining the case of Uruguay or India. So it really enriched the text as you keep reading. And perhaps the most illustrative one, and just to start explaining one, is the case of the buen vivir. That's living well. And that is a new concept that has emerged in the Andean countries. In Bolivia, it's part of the constitution and is the ultimate goal that should be for development, which is the ultimate development objective, which is to live well. And very important to highlight. And like these, many other examples come in the report. Now, UNRISD also follows the intellectual tradition started decades ago, and the summit has been Copenhagen summit has been already mentioned, and many others. But what is important to point is that, above all, it is a criticism of the Washington consensus, of this very orthodox set of policies that were done during the 80s and 90s and that we still sometimes see. And that they were predicating that growth had to become first, then social development will come second in importance, that the state has to be minimalized, that services had to be privatized, and deregulated in a number of ways. And this consensus keeps eroding over the time. We already saw how it was minimalized during the 1990s with a renewed emphasis on poverty reduction, given it was not happening, and growth was jobless. But what is very important to note, and UNRISD puts very well, is that it has changed nowadays. So what we're seeing is a new paradigm that has been formed since the, I would say, early 2000s, and it consolidates with the new Sustainable Development Goals. And now what we are talking is about the need is not growth first, it's the need to look at economic, social, and environmental issues in an integrated manner. It's not about minimalistic states, on the contrary, it's about strong public policies. And it's about a new social contract that is universal, it's about for all persons, not just a few safety nets for the poor, or a few minimalistic interventions for the most vulnerable. It's about a social contract with universal policies for everybody, including the middle classes that were left out of development thinking before. So it is, UNRISD does very well presenting all these arguments across the different chapters with very, compelling examples. They also bring alerts, and this is very important too, because there are a number of issues. While the world has agreed in all this phenomenal development agenda, the reality is that a number of countries are contracting budgets. Since 2010, majority of developing countries have been contracting budgets. In 2016, this year, as we are talking, it's about 132 countries in the world are cutting their budgets. And people think that austerity is an issue of Europe, but it's not correct. Austerity is actually happening in many developing countries. And the trend, according to IMF fiscal projections, is to stay until 2020 at least. So how are we going to implement these development goals? And UNRISD, it presents also the challenges that they are coming ahead, and we're going to have to deal with it. They also warn very strongly about the increasing inequalities in wealth, and they have a great, nice graphic with data from Credit Suisse. It's actually very, very telling. And the reality is that wealth inequalities keep increasing. So no matter the narrative of development, we're going to have to fight with this trend. But anyway, let me go a bit through some of the examples and innovations that come in the chapters. And chapter 2, for instance, focuses on social policy. And here we have a very strong case for universal policies, with many cases explained in a number of countries. Also about the importance of a strong regulation for health services. Then we have a very good section, for instance, on pension reforms. And now, perhaps it's not so known, but some 23 countries privatized their pension systems in the 1980s and 90s during the big time of the Washington Consensus. But in recent times, what we had is a reversal. Actually, countries are renationalizing pension systems. And countries like Argentina, Bolivia, Poland, Hungary, Kazakhstan, they reversed the privatizations, and they actually unprivatized the pension systems, reversing in one another manner. So these are important examples that one learns when reading the chapter. The chapter also explains how social pensions have gradually been expanded, universal coverage for all in a number of countries, for instance, Botswana, Lesotho, Namibia, and other examples. These countries have universal old-age pensions, regardless their level of development, which is something which is very, very important. Then they also present how integrated the strategies with employment, or social protection and employment, which is very important. We go to chapter 3, for instance. Chapter 3 focuses on care policies. Now, here, this is an enormous, this is a sector that is going to have enormous attention in the future. Millions of jobs are going to be created in the care economy if the world tackles correctly the issue of long-term care and of aging. So we expect that there's going to be an enormous development of this sector, which is going to also allow women participation into the labor force. So it's going to be positive from many points of view, and it's going to create growth because of this employment generation pattern. Then you have a chapter on social solidarity and the economy of the solidarity economy. Meaning cooperatives, a number of policies that you get there. And let me give you an example. They mention a number of cooperatives, of course, at national level, but they even have transnational examples, which are very interesting to see. For instance, how ALBA, which is a sub-regional association in Latin America, supports the Caja Rural Nacional in Nicaragua, that is a savings and credit co-op for agriculture, SMEs, and housing. So this is ALBA through supporting, oil transfers, actually has been supporting a Nicaragua credit cooperative. There are many more examples, but just to give one. At transnational level, which is interesting. Then you have a chapter devoted to climate change, which is very interesting, given the limited small team doing the research in UNRISD. Then they managed to put together a chapter on the green economy and others with nice examples like Costa Rica. Then you have a very powerful chapter on mobilizing domestic resources for sustainable development and the need for a progressive fiscal contract. And here there are fantastic examples in all areas, from domestic taxation, ODA, debt relief, illicit financial flows, and other. But let me just give you an example. Mongolia. Mongolia is a country that is financing a universal child benefit from a little tax on copper exports. This is a phenomenal good example. And finally, they close with a chapter which is on the governance of this social compact, the new social compact, which Katja gave a few details, but it's very important because the reality is that we need to bring politics back into the development agenda. Ultimately, it is about the governance arrangements and how things happened from global governance to corporate social accountability. So, an excellent report. I hope you enjoy it as I did this weekend, and a big applause to the UNRISD team for a fantastic report at a time that they were with very, very limited resources.
I'm very delighted for having the premiere of the report, so I feel privileged, and thank you for inviting me as part of this panel. World Vision, for those who don't know the organization, is a Christian organization that focuses on children, humanitarian relief, development and advocacy, and to eradicate poverty and injustice, particularly for children. So we were very active in the negotiations of the 2030 agenda. We were present in New York, struggling and wrestling with other organizations and agendas, and we're happy to see that the result of that negotiation is a framework that includes children, of course, and the children, as you can imagine, is relevant in every single sustainable development goal. In fact, there is a very good table developed by UNICEF together with the Convention on the Rights of the Child that you can find on the website that analyzes all these interlinkages. And I'm sure I'm not the first organization that says this in panels. All the different organizations with different focus areas say that this is an integrated agenda and that their issue is related to all the different sustainable development goals, which is true, and we should be proud of what we have achieved in that sense. But that is very much the what, and it's good that we analyze how all these issues interrelate. But it is, I think, it is time to move into the how, because as much as we can analyze conceptually how these issues are interrelated, then it is difficult to translate all these at national level, where you have different ministries that are used to making their specific budgets, and they're not necessarily willing to share the budget. They already consider that the budget is pretty small, particularly those ministries that have to do with health, environmental protection, and so on. So I think the challenge here is how we translate this new framework at the national level, and I think that that's what this report does. It shows, it gives glimpses of very innovative ways of how to translate this very ambitious agenda at the national level and into action. So there are many things to be said. I mean, it was described. I had a bit of a description of the report and the things to highlight, but this was already said. So in the interest of time, I'll just go straight into the piece that interests me the most, because we are already doing some work related to that, and this has to do with everything related to active citizenship, establishing forums that actually institutionalize participation, which is obviously things that we've been talking about in the international community, but it's very challenging to actually implement at local, national, and even regional levels. So I thought that I will give you an example of something that we are doing, also within the context of the Sustainable Development Goal, in our office, with our offices in Mali. So we've been working with partners, or also focusing on children and development, so the children, Terre des Hommes, and Orphan, to establish a consultative process that actually finished last month only. So I don't have anything to distribute. Hopefully I'll do that in the next panel. But basically had to do with building the voice of citizens to put forward to governments, so that they have the material and the interest of the people of Mali when they design the national strategy to implement the Sustainable Development Goals. And the way we did this is to organize in roundtables, or kind of roundtables at the commune level with the commune authorities. Perhaps similarly to Switzerland, Mali has a decentralized system where commune authorities take decisions related to health, education, social protection, and so on. So we organized consultation at those levels, roundtables where discussions were taking place, and then looking at what the problems were and compared where it would fall within the Sustainable Development Goals framework, and making sure also that the most vulnerable participated in those tables, so using tools that we had used already in other countries with our initiative called Citizens' Voice. So also making sure that the most vulnerable, sometimes people that didn't have access to education and so on, are also participating in these consultations. So these groups or cells are composed of men, women, and children, of course, which is one of our strengths. We always make sure that children participate in these discussions. And once those round of consultations took place, this was taken at the regional level, where we aggregated some of the recommendations and the views that were already compiled at the grassroots, and then it was taken to a higher level at the national level, where all the recommendations were compiled, and now these turned to be the Charte des Citoyens, or the People's Chart, that was presented, like I said, last month to the government of Mali. All throughout the process, different actors and relevant actors were brought into the consultations and the different stages. Particularly, of course, the different ministries, the Ministry of Economy and Finance, the Ministry of Health and Hygiene, the Ministry of Energy and Water, and so on, so they could actually see what was emerging from the different concerns and different groups. And also donor and financial institutions like the African Development Bank, the African Union, USAID, and representatives from Canada and the Netherlands, among others. So in this consultation, we from all the people that participated, citizens, individuals that participated in these consultations, 28% were children, and 56% were women. So now the story is unfinished, of course. We will see how the process will continue and how the government will take up these recommendations and this people's chart into account. But of course, any clever politician would actually turn that into their program and campaign with it. But so we'll see what happens. In any case, just to say again that these are the type of initiatives that we're trying to do partnering with others. Of course, World Vision would not have been able to do this by itself. And we want to take this forward. We want to share this, all the experiences we have been accumulating through the decades with our Geneva community, which is indeed a very good place to start a lab or hub to exchange innovative policies and experience on the ground that moves the agenda forward. And again, this report, which I recommend reading, I read one of the chapters and the summary, is already gives a lot of innovative policy schemes that we can use, share, and take forward. Thank you.